We're continuing our series in Matthew on the kingdom of God, and we're going to still be in Matthew chapter 13. There's a lot that Jesus says in this chapter about the kingdom of God. And so let's turn to Matthew chapter 13, and I'm going to start in verse 24 and read through 30 if you follow along with me. You can stand if you want. He put another parable before them, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while his men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed seeds among the wheat and went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared also. And the servants of the master of the house came and said to him, 'Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have weeds?' He said to them, 'An enemy has done this.' So the servants said to him, 'Then you want us to go and gather them?' But he said, 'No, lest in gathering the weeds you root up the wheat along with them. Let both grow together until the harvest, and at the harvest time I will tell the reapers, gather the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn.'" You may be seated. We're going to skip down to verse 36 as we talk about this passage, because in verse 36, the disciples come back to Jesus when they have him alone, and they say, "Could you explain that parable to us?" And Jesus explains it. So we're going to talk about the explanation here. Then he left the crowds and went into the house, and his disciples came to him, saying, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field." And he answered, "The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man." So he's saying, basically, he is, the Messiah, is the one who sows the good seed. The field is the world. So that's a pretty all-encompassing word, the world. And the good seed is the sons of the kingdom. So those who belong to the Son of Man, those who belong to the Messiah, who belong to Jesus, they represent the good seed sowed in the world. So we would call this the church, right? In our current age and way of thinking. So he's sowing the seed in the world. The weeds are the sons of the evil one. And the enemy who sowed them is the devil. So we also have in the world other seeds that are sown, and these are the people who belong to the devil, who are doing his work, who are following his ways. You notice here that there's two kinds of seeds. There's the good seed and the bad seed. There's no other kinds in this parable. It's one or the other. So therefore, if we think about this, we can quantify every person in the world as either being a good seed or a bad seed. Keep that in mind as we look at this parable a little more. The harvest is the end of the age. So we're in the church age. We're in the age, and an age is not a definite, specific, always the same period of time, but it denotes a time between two events. The end of the age is typically when Jesus will come back. Okay? We're not there yet. We're still in this age that he's talking about. So we have to make it very clear that we're not yet to the end of the age. We haven't passed that point yet. So as we look at this age, at the end of the age, they have the harvest, and the reapers are angels. And just as the weeds are gathered and burned with fire, so will it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all causes of sin and lawbreakers. So all the bad seed that's grown into bad things, God's going to gather those that produced bad fruit and throw them into the fiery furnace. And in that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear. So when we think about this and remember, who sorts out the weeds from... Who does the sorting? The angels do the sorting. The weeds and the good plants don't sort themselves. It's important that we think about this, because when you think about a parable, usually a parable has a main point. And we could think about this parable as is the main point that everybody's going to be sorted out. Well, that's a possibility, but we also have to think about how it's done and when it's done. Because I think that's the important piece. Because what did the servants, his angels, ask the Son of Man when we looked at the original story? When they discovered the weeds in the field, the bad people in the world, what did they ask? Should we go sort them out now? Should we go deal with them now? And what does he say? What does the Master say? No, because if you try to sort them out now, you try to pull up all the weeds now, you might uproot some of the good plants and you're going to damage the harvest. So what we see from this parable is a couple things. First of all, the church is in the world. The church is mixed in with those in the world who are not of the kingdom. That's the way it is. And that's the way it will be until Jesus comes again at the end of the age and sorts it out. We as the church need to come to the place where we are thinking about that, the fact that we will not be separated from the world. Because there's a real temptation for us, I believe, as a church to feel like we need to separate ourselves from the world. We need to wall the world off. We need to circle the wagons, if you read the Chameleon Christianity books, he's talking about being salt and light, and say we're not like muskox that circle around, shutting everything else out. We are to be interspersed in the world. And we need to resist the temptation to separate ourselves in that way. So that's the first. The second thing we need to think about is it the job of the good seed to sort itself out? What's the job of the good seed in this parable? To grow and produce fruit. Okay? So our job as a church to be in the world, to grow in our relationship with Christ, and produce good fruit. That's our job. When we make it our job to uproot what we perceive as the weeds, what are we potentially going to do? We're going to do damage to the fruit, to the church, to the fruit God is trying to produce. So if we go out in the world and think it's our job to uproot all the evil in the world and deal with it, now that doesn't mean we don't deal with our own evil and we don't deal with our own problems and we don't try to do good and we don't try to produce good fruit, but it's not our job to point fingers at everybody else and saying, oh, nope, you go. It's not our job. It's not our job to sit in judgment of the world. There's one other parable that I want to look at in this chapter, and that's in verse 40, starting in verse 47. It's pretty short. In verse 47, he says, again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea and gathered fish of every kind. So in this new parable, the world is the sea, and there's all kinds of fish in it. And he says the kingdom is like a net that is cast into the sea, into the world, and catches all the kind. It's not discriminatory. It harvests all the fish. And he says, and when it was full, the men drew it ashore, and they sat down and sorted the good into containers, but threw away the bad. So will be at the end of the age. The angels will come out and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into the fiery furnace. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now this is the second place in this chapter where we see this phrase, into the fiery furnace, where they're going to be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, I remember as a kid reading these passages, and I didn't like them. Does anybody want to go to the place that's described as a fiery furnace where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth? Anyone? Anyone? If you do, you need some serious help. But I remember as a young person how these sorting passages bothered me. Why?